Okay, so we are going to go ahead and get started. So welcome, we have a small group today, but that's okay. Welcome to our second to the last Lunch and Learn for the semester. Today we have Dr. Jenifer Gamble presenting on social enterprise models for economic growth and community benefit. So we're excited about that. We also have, next week we have, not next week, the week, is it next week? Okay. It's all blurring together in my head. Next week on April 23rd, on Tuesday, we have our last Lunch and Learn for the semester. Jenifer Powell is going to be presenting on social work and the law. That's a rescheduled Lunch and Learn. It's actually in a different room in the Blackwater room. If you're interested, please come. That's going to be a really good one. Yes, I believe it's over here on the other side, yes. So a couple business things before we get started. I'm going to pass around the sign-in sheet as well as the evaluation form. Make sure you sign in and fill out the evaluation form, and then just bring it to me at the end. And then if you need a certificate for CE credits, you can come up at the end and pick that up, and then fill it out. I'm going to Campbell and let her take it away. Terrific. Good morning. Happy Monday, everyone. Excited to be talking to you guys about social enterprise organizations and the possibilities that exist within this kind of hybrid model that is emerging throughout the world, really. So this is, here we go. Okay. Arrows better than the mouse. So today, this is going to take kind of a global feel because there's a lot of evidence, in fact, more evidence that's coming from around the world than we're actually finding as much in the United States. But today we're going to talk about sustainable development goals and how this work can connect to those. We're going to talk a little bit about the social landscape or social enterprise landscape. We're going to talk about how this sector is growing and what we're seeing in terms of growth, and then potential social work contributions, as well as hopefully leaving time for questions and discussion. The objective is to understand this landscape and the growth that's being experienced in the sector, to recognize some of those global trends, identify opportunities for progress in this area, and then identify key areas for potential research and other social work contributions. So a little bit about me and like kind of how I got interested in this. My doctoral research was all on nonprofit leadership and organizational models, and so I've always been really interested in the structures and kind of how organizations work, operate, and how they can work within a community to support the needs of that community. And then for a handful of years, I had the great privilege of running a global fellowship. And the fellows that we selected, this was at Brookings Institution, it was called the Echidna Global Scholars Fellowship. These were social entrepreneurs, you know, kind of your movers and shakers in the human services sector who were doing incredible work on girls' education, global education. And so it was my job to, you know, read hundreds of applications and then also visit with and really get to know different programs that are around the world and social entrepreneurs around the world that are making great gains by doing things a little differently. And a lot of times there's a lot of innovation involved and these hybrid models. And so really kind of piqued my interest. And you can read about me, but that's kind of how I came to this topic. So just to touch upon it really quickly, you know, there are 17 different sustainable development goals that were adopted in 2015 by the United Nations and many countries. And like these are the big things that we all need to work on in order for us to have a sustainable planet by 2030. And so there are three main areas where, you know, I kind of connect this because of my own background, but I think that there are a lot of connecting points with the Sustainable Development Goals. So with number 4, ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning for all. One of the ways that social enterprise really connects with this is that in many countries they do not have the strong education systems and education sector with the same kind of regulations. And so a lot of social enterprise organizations and nonprofits or social enterprise organizations will take up education as their service. So this is kind of part of that. And we see that there are 263 million children and young people out of school, with more than 60 million girls that are never going to be in school. And so as we can think about organizations and mechanisms to further their education, create access. That's part of this one. Gender equality, achieving gender equality, empowering all women and girls by 2030. We know that women are in the workforce at a lower participation rate, 63%, age 25 to 54, compared to 94% of men. And this is in kind of global statistics. We know that women are only holding less than 24% of parliamentary seats. And so kind of moving women, and how do we help encourage women to step into positions of influence and community contribution. And we also know that women do a lot more unpaid work care and domestic work than their male counterparts. And so there are opportunities there with social enterprise organizations to help kind of level the playing field. And you can see all of the different, like I said, the different sustainable development goals. There are 17, kind of an odd number. A friend of mine said, well, they must have been very intentional about those 17. They weren't trying to like round it out to 20, you know, or something like that. But you can see, I mean, ending poverty. There are so many different areas where this can come to play. But number 8 being decent work and economic growth, that we're promoting sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. And so this is an opportunity, a great opportunity for that. And a couple of things to kind of keep in mind. While the U.S. education system is you know, pretty sophisticated, and many other developed countries are also have sophisticated education systems, learning and work are evolving. And what we know from both developed countries and developing, that more than 825 million school-age children will not have the minimum secondary school skills to hold a job by 2030. And that's almost half. So there's like 1 point, I think, it's like 1.9 billion, I believe, youth will be of working age by 2030. And if you think that, gosh, almost half of them will not have those skill sets, our education sector has an opportunity as well as workforce development, because the skills youth need for jobs they're not getting in school anymore. Our old school kind of model is not producing what we need for it to do. We also know that women's workforce participation has not raised in nearly 20 years. So a couple of big goals to kind of sit in the backdrop of this. So understanding social enterprise landscape. So what we're talking about are organizations that, from the Social Enterprise Alliance, that they address a basic unmet need or solve a social problem through a market-driven approach. Now, what we've seen over the past couple of decades, but a lot of tremendous growth has happened really since like mid-2000s, 2008, is that organizations, whether they are nonprofit organizations that are spinning off with a revenue-producing program, or an organization, an LLC, or a for-profit company is starting that meets the community need and is not trying to end at a zero balance like a 501c3 organization typically would in the United States, that those things are kind of coming together quite a lot. And so we have more social entrepreneurs and individuals that are in business saying, we can address some of our community needs. We just need to kind of tweak and twist our mission a bit. So the profit motive is not the motive. The motive is to have community impact. You know, so what you see in terms of general criteria as we frame this is that more than 25% of their income is through an actual revenue producing mechanism. They're selling something, they're doing something, they're producing a service, something to that degree. People are still getting grants and they're still getting seed funding, but 25% being actual earned. They're prioritizing that social or environmental mission over financial profit, or above or equal to, not relying on volunteering, grants, or donations to survive. So we see, I'll touch on this, but you know, we see lots of retail and service sector opportunities coming about. And there's no stakeholders, it's not publicly traded. So you're seeing a different kind of structure in terms of governance. So that's kind of general criteria. So, goodwill. Everyone I think here should be familiar with goodwill. Their motto of a hand up, not a handout. So in 1902, Goodwill Industries was established. But in 2014, nearly $5 billion in revenue was through their retail sales. And so when you think about Goodwill Industries, there's job training, there's retail sales, they're really taking their model, and their goal is to workforce development. And so in the 1980s, they twisted and adopted that model and really reduced the amount of their dependence on some of those more traditional nonprofit funding sources. And then we also see that in 2008, the 2008 economic crisis, there were many, many more organizations kind of started and were sprouted from this. These organizations are going to have different names. Some call themselves social enterprises, some are nonprofit ventures, for-profit social enterprises, social businesses. So there's really, we're kind of in this weird phase where there's still a lot of freedom and independence in terms of how folks are recognizing themselves, and so the terminology has not been fully adopted, across the board. Like, oh, we're going to call this that. So you're going to see some of these terms float around, but that's basically referencing an organization or a business that exists to meet a community need. So why adopt this approach? Many organizations that will adopt this approach do it for financial stability. They want to do good in the community, but they're not super sold on benefits of being tax exempt, much less the regulation around being tax exempt, and pursuing grants and donations and kind of that charitable approach to their business is not really how they want to go about it. We all know, many know, I can make any assumptions, but like the restricted versus unrestricted revenue tension that exists within many NGOs is tough. And so organizations will often, they have funds, but they can't use them for what they want to use them for. And so opening up more unrestricted dollars is a big bonus. Really showing innovation in communities and saying, we have this workforce need, and let's bring these things together. We have an idea, and that's going to, create new businesses, create new employment opportunities, and gives you a lot of flexibility. So these legal structures also are being taken up around the world in different ways. So in the United States, you may see more 501c3s. Again, your more traditional nonprofit model that is tax exempt, that has a revenue producing entity along with it. They still have to balance out, but we would say that yes, that's a social enterprise because of the revenue producing piece. LLCs, traditional businesses. Low profit limited liability companies, those are popping up. Public benefit corporation, also a legal framework an organization can take up. Flexible purpose, and then in other countries you see things like community interest company in Section 8. But I think that this quote here in yellow was from Deloitte. Businesses today, they just came out with a report on this, businesses today are being valued as much by their interactions and impacts on society as they are their financial results. And I think that drives a lot of consumer behaviors and consumer interest as well. Is this a company that I can get behind because not only are they good with their practices, but they have a mission that is supporting my community or an issue that I am interested in. And maybe that's environmental, maybe it's education, maybe it's gender equity, could be a variety of things, but your consumer dollars then get put towards an organization or towards a safety. So here are just some examples of social enterprises. How many have heard of BRAC? BRAC? So BRAC originally stood for the Bangladesh Rural Agricultural Cooperative. It was an agriculture co-op in Bangladesh that has since grown to be the world's largest nonprofit that has so many different revenue producing aspects that it is just this incredible example of a social enterprise where they have their own banking, they give their own loans, they're employing people to make individuals to literally grow and monitor the silk pods to create the silk to then weave into the scarves to then sell. So you've got a whole supply chain that's being created within this organization. Tom's is one where folks may be more familiar, 1 for 1. So if you buy a pair of Tom's shoes, a pair of Tom's shoes goes to another country and on the feet of a child that would not get the shoes otherwise. DC Central Kitchen, another example of workforce development. NIB is National Industries for the Blind, and they're actually my neighbor for about 6 years. And so being in a community where you have individuals that have special needs or that are living and experiencing a disability, having an entire industry that is there to employ them is really awesome, because you see that folks are able to do many, many things. I think that sometimes we underestimate the industry from folks that may be living with disabilities or have other limitations or challenges that they're dealing with. So these are just a couple of things that are happening. Honest Tea. Folks have bought an Honest Tea. So that started as a social enterprise. Now, in West Virginia, we also had some of these happening, which is really, really exciting, because West Virginia's workforce participation rate is less than 50%, or right around 50%. It's the lowest in the country. Cafe Appalachia is a farm-to-table, kind of like, homegrown products that employs women who are in recovery, specifically. Now, this is down in Charleston. And so their whole mission is to, grow, feed, and teach, as it says on their logo. Impact Construction is here in Morgantown. It's a construction company that is owned and operated by a gentleman who is also in recovery, and he employs folks who are in recovery. That is the intention. So again, kind of really directed at who is our workforce and who needs employment opportunity. Are there particular populations or groups that need these? Coalfield Development is doing some amazing things, and you'll see all 5 of their social enterprise organizations. Coalfield Development started as housing, but then quickly has moved and continued to grow and evolve to include lots of other different industries and aspects. So Reclaim, Rediscover, Refresh, Revitalize, and Rewire Appalachia are all different social enterprises. And Reintegrate Appalachia is the program that connects to Coalfield Development through Ascension Recovery Services. So you have an LLC that is partnered with these to help supply that workforce. So some really interesting things that are already happening in West Virginia, and a lot of possibility. So there we go. So in 2012, there was a great social enterprise census. This was the biggest data collection point for social enterprise organizations in the US. And what we learned from that is that this is a sector that is employing 10 million people with more than 500 billion in revenues. Now, some are large, some are small. We see that 40% have fewer than 5 employees, but just 8 have more than 100. And so you're going to range in size, ranging from 250 million or 250,000 in revenue to 22% having over 2 million. So, a little less than half are operating on a real kind of modest scale. No one's in this to try and get super rich. They're doing this because they saw a need in their community. They could start a business and employ folks to fix. And we see that 35% are nonprofits, and so they're going to have that 501c3 tax exemption. So they're going to have to do that book balancing piece. And 31% are regular corporations or companies. 89% of all of these organizations have been created since 2006. So massive growth in the sector, massive growth. And again, 90% are focused on solving problems. Now in the UK, it's a little bit different. There's a more recent report in 2015. And what this research really honed in on was, what are they doing? 40% of those organizations are being led by females. 40% of those organizations have a director that has some kind of disability or is reported living with a disability. Compared to small and medium-sized enterprises, 41% are creating jobs in the past 12 months versus 22% of kind of your regular organizations. So they're really, really about job creation. I really appreciated the mission aspect, because 31% of those organizations in the UK are working in the 20 most deprived communities. So they're identifying those specific communities and environments where there are particular challenges and very intentionally locating their organizations there, so that it creates training opportunities, job opportunities, all of those. And 59% being an individual who's disadvantaged in the labor market. And what that means is individuals with a disability, individuals in recovery, experience trauma, individuals with criminal backgrounds, So those folks that sometimes have the hardest time getting a job. I know that there's a conversation happening at the national level about remove the box, so that someone applying for a job doesn't have to say, yes, I have a felony conviction, or yes, I have been charged with a misdemeanor or felony, because those create barriers in many ways for folks to become employed. So the UK, those results were consistent with what we're seeing in the US, and again, kind of really looking at who are we trying to employ. So in developed economies, we're seeing that, kind of this theme. One out of every 4 new enterprises set up is a social enterprise. Now that's from the EU. And we see that, a lot of these are being led by females, being led by disadvantaged individuals. 57% of those in Canada are less than 3 years old, with 81% having a social purpose, 45% to achieve a cultural purpose, and a quarter of them working just towards employment development. So we see like the focus there is really clear, like we want to create opportunities for individuals for employment. And I thought Australia was interesting. There are more than 20,000 social enterprises, with a third of them being within the past 2 to 5 years. And so we're seeing also, this was similar in the US, similar in the UK, that we're hovering somewhere between 3 to 4% of GDP. So in emerging economies, and so communities where there are fewer, where maybe there's a lot of flexibility in terms of regulation and setting up a company or an organization. Some countries don't have a 501c3 type designation to be a nonprofit, and so you are just starting an organization. So in India, more than 89% of these organizations are less than 10 years old. So huge growth in the past 10 years. We have universities who are getting involved with teaching social entrepreneurship, which is huge. And I think that we see here at WVU, we have the Big Brick Street Center on Innovation. So I think that there's a lot of conversation around like how do we set up these organizations. Vietnam, 68% of theirs are working towards poverty reduction. 48% have environmental objectives. So that may be recycle, repurpose, reuse. It may be emergency communications during tsunamis or during environmental crises, things like that. So there's a lot of movement. I guess my point in this is there's a tremendous amount of energy going into this sector and growth, and it can be kind of uncontained in a lot of ways, although we see some common threads. In India, a quarter of their social enterprises are led by females, which far surpasses the traditional model where about 9% are female-led businesses in a traditional sense. So the social enterprise aspect, we see a lot of growth where women are taking that up as in starting organizations and companies as opposed to that traditional business model, profit model. The inclusion aspect was really key, that 70% of those organizations are working with individuals from socially and economic disadvantaged communities. And when you think about in India, you have the caste system, and so you have many more layers of poverty and disadvantage because of that. 80% of the organizations are working with women, 31% working with people with disabilities, and 46% working with children. And then also in India, I've had the opportunity to go to India and visit with some schools, and the education system, it's such a huge population. The education system is tough. It's very tough to meet those educational needs of every child. And so what you see are organizations like social enterprise organizations. A colleague of mine runs one called Study Hall Education Foundation, where it's promoting educational literacy. They are providing the education services. So in a lot of ways, they kind of end up like charter schools would here in the US. So you have independent school systems, independent education providers, and social enterprises are doing a lot of that. So you see the job creation aspect is also quite high. So in terms of global trends, this is clearly a young and emerging market. There's a lot of quick growth, and I think that we also see a very purpose-driven generation that is coming coming into their own, where they don't want to work a job 9 to 5 and not have any purpose. Maybe youth and adolescents and young folks are very interested in many ways on how do I connect my life with my work and make my work contribute to something that I care about and believe in. So we see that this area is really growing. A lot of female participation as leaders in this and kind of going back to those sustainable development goals, far surpassing traditional business models, targeting disadvantaged groups, and creating employment opportunities is the priority. Now this is kind of a flip because in your traditional employment model, you're going to try and keep your employment count, your full-time, your FTE count, your full-time employees, you're going to try and keep that low because you're going to have to pay their salaries or pay their hourly rate, pay their insurance and benefits and all of the things that go along with that. So if your profit is your motive, you want to reduce the number of FTEs. Whereas with this model, you want to find different opportunities for creating employment. Like how could we create more jobs? How could we employ more people? Because the bottom line is creating those opportunities, not the profit that comes on the other side of it. And so it's a real shift in terms of focus and thinking. Yes, sir.
Fifth point down is generating income and turning a profit. Trade, is that exchange of goods or trade like burgers?
It can be either.
Oh.
It can be either. There are different organizations kind of popping up all over the country, and it seems kind of not to say stereotypical, but lots of bakeries with women in recovery who are making cookies and creating things using the skills that they may already know, but applying that to a business model. There are also plenty of different companies that have started up where individuals maybe have mobility issues are providing a service transcontinental. They may be a call center or serving as operators or working in that way for a company who's is established in India, or vice versa. So you have a lot of different things that they're doing. So it could be like actual profits, it could be a service, but many of them, like Hopeful Development, really focuses on skill development. How do we ensure that the folks that are entering our programs that are working in our businesses are gaining skills that they can use today and transferable to their lives? So I think it's both. It's a good question. It's really exciting that universities are getting involved in this because our previous model of charitable nonprofits, give us grants, really scrappy, having to fight for contributions, and a lot of the fund development activities on this hand versus having a for-profit model and stakeholders and, being publicly traded, very, very different. And so now we're finding this middle ground where you can do good and still make a living. It's not about ending at zero. Make a living. It's good. Everybody wants that. And by far and large, this is affecting the bottom. The individuals who have fewer resources, who have been marginalized, disenfranchised, and excluded from traditional job training programs, from traditional university settings, and traditional employment opportunities. So, they're really looking at how do we do this well, but these are global trends. Now, in terms of inclusivity, again, this disadvantaged group piece is very important. And what's also important, and as I just talked about, the full-time employee versus, reducing your FTE count versus increasing your FTE count, or even part-time employees, one of the things that social enterprise models have been really successful at doing is creating different opportunities for employment. So it's not full-time or part-time as very standard and strict calculations for revenue are set. It's based on what those individuals are needing. And so maybe it is, more feasible for a specific population to work part-time late at night. And so that would contribute to the business model and whatever their service offering is. So kind of bringing these pieces together. So more part-time opportunities, more contract opportunities, but things that are flexible, because if your goal is to employ individuals who are more marginalized and increase female participation in the workforce, which many of them are doing, you're going to find folks that have families and other responsibilities and lots of caretaking responsibilities. And again, coming back to that original, one of the early slides where women are taking up 2.6 times the caregiving responsibilities as their male counterparts. And so social enterprise organizations are able to modify those work requirements and the times and schedules because they know those things are happening and work with folks, as opposed to, we're very strict about this, you have to be here because our profit model relies on you as an FTE showing up and doing X and Y. It's a little bit different. The focus on community needs and practice promoting equity and inclusion is really huge because a lot of these organizations are filling huge gaps in countries and in our own country where services are not being provided or quality training and education programs are not there. And as you know, I think of West Virginia as having a real opportunity, particularly in the addictions area. How many folks are coming out of recovery that have, that are still coping with being in recovery and moving through their sobriety, that maybe have criminal backgrounds or have incidents that they wish weren't there, but they are. And so maybe non-traditional work opportunities may be more up their alley, but also training programs. How do folks know about training programs to actually get back into the workforce when they haven't been there for very long or haven't been in the workforce for some time because of whether that is a physical issue or addiction or a disability. So this can really help pull folks into the workforce, but you have to have that mindset of what can we do to create jobs? What is the need that we have here to create jobs? Think about transportation. Some of the transportation challenges in West Virginia and in Morgantown, I listen to students and I keep thinking, something there, like what could we do to help target a population and maybe solve this problem? So creating transportation opportunities with populations that have been excluded from the traditional workforce. So we have to think about how do we start pairing these needs and populations up. So key areas for attention. This gentleman right here is actually from Coalfields Development, one of their folks. So opportunities, entrepreneurship programs, how do we get young folks and old folks, everyone, thinking about that shift, thinking about that different mindset, networking, collaborating, creating those opportunities for folks who are doing this work to learn from one another, because again, it's very loosey-goosey right now. It's very kind of open-ended in a lot of ways. Micro enterprise growth. So how do you start very small? And sometimes I think that may begin with kind of somebody taking up a side job or a side hustle. They've recognized that they want more revenue in their lives, that they need that in their families and their households, but how do you create those micro enterprise opportunities that fit and meet a need as well? Measuring the impact of this is a huge opportunity because we've got lots of statistics, but the so what question afterwards, like so what, we've got lots more women who are leading these organizations. What difference has that made in their families and in their communities? And so some more long-term evaluation is really needed in this area. Now, some of the biggest challenges are access to funding, because a lot of folks who are starting these are unsure, do I apply for a grant? Could I get seed funding do I have to pay this back? Do I not have to pay this back? A lot of bank and formal lending institutions are not so familiar with the social enterprise model because they want to see what's your profit going to be. How much money are you going to make after 2 years of being in business? And look at that from a loan versus profit percentage versus, well, how do we measure the impact that you're going to have in the community? So formal lending institutions also have to kind of shift their thinking and some of the data that they include on spreadsheets for projections, because if you're not focused on profit, what are you focused on? And then why would we give you this loan? Or why would we give you this seed funding? Sector understanding, again, we have all these different names and all these different types. So clearly there are lots and lots of energy and activity in the sector, but creating some consistency around that so that you can measure those pieces is huge. Legal support for organizations. It's a big deal to have a 501c3 tax-exempt status. And there are regulations that go along with that. And there are governance regulatory pieces that accompany that. So if somebody says, I want to start 501c3, but I want to have this revenue-producing model on the side, do they have the right legal advice to make sure that they're not committing some kind of fraud or miscalculation in their budgeting. And so your finance and accounting practices are also something to think about. So not just legal, but also accounting support, and vice versa. You know, if you have an organization that is there to create opportunities and can still make money, what kinds of things do you have to provide to those employees? So I mean, depending on the size of organization. So there's a lot of questions there still. Creating and supporting skill development for social entrepreneurs and folks that have the courage to get out there and start something. And do they have the mentoring? Do they have the leadership support? Are there networks for them to be involved in? Some folks just have great ideas and they get out there and they get into it and they're like, wait a second, this is so much bigger than I thought it was going to be. I don't know how to get a handle on this. I was an independent contractor and started this up. Now I've got all these employees. I need a mentor because now I'm managing people. Maybe they hadn't done that before. And we just need more and better data. As you can see, like big census type pieces, big studies are being done in a variety of countries, but really drilling down into what are those key pieces that, what's the impact? You know, raw numbers is basically what we're getting a lot right now, and case study examples from some organizations, but we don't yet have that rich information and a lot of the qualitative and quantitative that we would need. So what are those specific aspects that make this more successful now? So there are also policy opportunities. You know, this is a policy-rich environment. There's so many different things that are on the table. You know, looking at government and private sector strategies that focus on these kinds of collaborations. You know, we think about our business development sectors and local organizations that are trying to promote business development. Are they looking at this? Policies for pro-social enterprise government and financial regulations. So, and kind of looking at this as a different financial model for a lot. The impact that social enterprise organizations could have by jumping in and being part of traditional government and institutional services. So how could that shift and change some of the budget allocations that we know are set to go to folk rehab or go to education or go to some other kind of entity? Will those be offset? So there are different policy things to think about in that respect. Certainly strategies for reducing gender pay gap are part of that. West Virginia has one of the highest pay gap inequities between males and females in the region at 28%. So 28% more time for a female to earn the same amount as a male doing the same work. And environmental considerations for climate mitigation and adaptation. You've got social enterprises that are starting off and putting, you know, installing solar panels. And so as a company that is, so my friend's organization in Malawi, it's a scholarship and leadership development program for young girls. It helps them get through high school, essentially, through scholarship funds and leadership funds. And as a next step, they are training young women to install and service solar panels. Well, as a company to install and service solar panels, are there environmental tax write-offs? Are there different considerations for organizations that are doing the social good and employing individuals without seeking large profits, that are working on real key issues around clean water, clean air, and energy? So just some policy pieces. Now, in terms of social work contributions, it's varied. Certainly macro practice and leadership and managerial skill set development is huge and is a huge opportunity as we see more young folks saying, I want to start my own thing, and I don't know that I want it to be a nonprofit. Micro enterprising pilots, so we see that there are emerging markets there, and how could we as social workers support some of those? There are rural and urban applications. So this isn't about being in a city and starting this up. Rural environments have huge opportunities in doing this. You know, it says U.S. and global markets are underdeveloped, and there are lots of different social challenges that we have really an opportunity to look at with different eyes. whether that is mental health, homelessness, food security, education, abuse, trauma. I mean, there are so many different aspects and populations that we know and so many others don't. And so how could we take that knowledge that we have around population groups and the needs that they have and start businesses and start projects that give them a handout. And so research also exploring these models and their effectiveness and really examining the leadership profiles, those community characteristics, or those key program pieces that are in the structures and the systems that are involved in order to make the most and positive change in communities. So there are lots of different opportunities there where we can take, evidence-based practice and translate that into a business environment that provides opportunities for folks that have been marginalized or vulnerable. Final message, a rising tide lifts all boats. It is a huge opportunity for social workers to engage in this kind of sector development and social change to really support and address the population needs that we know are in many cases growing. And so thinking a little outside of the box and it's going to help us move into a more progressive and sustainable environment. Questions? Thank you.
Did you say the social work school has a curriculum?
We do not have a curriculum for this yet. We do provide, so for MSW programs, we do require all students to take organizational leadership and social administration, which touches on some of those system pieces, but in many ways focuses more on social workers as managers. How do we manage and lead organizations? We don't go into those different versions, types, if you will, whether that's a nonprofit model or an LLC that is doing good. So there's a lot of room there, I think, for curriculum development. Other questions, thoughts? What do you think about this stuff?
Well, I've worked for, I don't know if you're familiar with the corporation that I work with, Ph.D. and HRDF, and we're kind of 50 years ago. Really was started by the AFL-CIO to provide housing for low-income, disadvantaged, able individuals. Probably the largest HUD housing company, non-profit in the state of West Virginia.
Yeah.
Kind of familiar with. And the one thing that, and we're kind of a mix. We're part of our company, like Morgantown Union Manor. We only manage that building. It is for profit. We're still HUD Section 8. And the one thing that I see that is not addressed is we get these people that's got convictions on. We have a lot of, as we pull out of this malaise of drug addiction that we are facing here in the state. And we're number one in people dying. We're number one in people dying in the state, which is scary. It's scary. And these people get felony conviction. Where are we going to house these people? After we get them employed, we can't house them in Section 8.
Right.
Because once you have a felony conviction, a lot of people show up and say, yeah, you know what we have? We get these people that have aged out in the prison system. They're 62 years old and they come out and they don't have no income. And hey, we could put you in a facility or in an apartment for practically nothing, but because you got a felony conviction, we have to turn you away.
Yeah.
So, so many issues.
Yeah.
I'm kind of on the front line of all that.
Yeah.
And they looked at me and they said, well, where can we go? You can't move in here.
Yeah. So, I'm going to rephrase this. So, individuals who are coming out of the prison system, maybe having aged out, and individuals who have backgrounds that include felonies or even some misdemeanors are having challenges and really hard times being housed in locations that were initially intended for low-income folks and receive those government subsidies. And so again, kind of thinking about the policy pieces, you know, what would that look like if Unity Manor or the organization, the company that takes that, owns that, were to shift and advocate for the ability to house individuals?
Well,
so, you know, I mean, there are a lot of institutional pieces there.
We can shift and advocate for that. But where I see the issue is that we're wanting to hammer everybody. If you use drugs and you're convicted, we're going to put you in jail for 30 years. You know, you take a lot of these people that are in jail for drug conviction, you know, for marijuana, been in jail for 20 years. I mean, just think to yourself, how many people wanted to use marijuana? These people were in jail. Maybe they didn't really, you know, what they did 30 years ago is not really, you know, we'd say, well, I don't even compare to, you know, selling heroin or some of the other things that we're doing now. And then people are, you know, it has to start somewhere in with our government, with the federal regulations on who we're allowed to rent to. And we're gonna hammer these people there. And by God, they're never going to use it because they're going to see, oh, we'll never get that house. That don't enter into but addicts.
Yeah, that's not a motivation.
Yeah, that's not a motivation. I don't see it down there.
And there are a lot, I mean, there are many, the exact percentage, so I'm saying anecdotally we know that there are many, many organizations that are starting as social enterprise businesses specifically to employ individuals who are coming out of, that are in recovery. And because we also know that it requires a different kind of HR policy, you know, to hire someone at a traditional, you know, at a traditional company or let's just say a restaurant. They don't show up one time, they get a warning. They show up 2 times, they get fired. You know, how do we start to work with traditional organizations as well and help them understand that their human resource policies may not be recovery friendly? And what kind of supports and staffing and benefits even would be essential to have if you're going to be employing a population, a recovery population. We have to start shifting our thinking and saying, you know, there are special things that we will need, and by doing those, we will have a dedicated and committed and loyal workforce who now has opportunities and are able to pull themselves out of poverty from the opportunity. So, I mean, there's a big shift that has to happen in our thinking. Yes, sir.
If I was running one of those organizations, I would prove that I had to take 75% show. So we're going to keep that going on that day. So is there a sense of longevity about enterprises?
The early data says that they're just as successful.
All right.
Yeah. And if you look, kind of go back to how big or small those organizations are, you know, there's a sense of belonging and loyalty in a lot of ways, and understanding in some different ways around some of the challenges that folks have faced in order to get them where they are. And so that sense of community, I've definitely been reading lots of different case study examples where, you know, they look out for one another. They may have an NA or an AA meeting at the job, you know, before their shifts start. So it's a conducive environment for whatever those needs are that individuals have. We're talking a lot about addiction and recovery, but, you know, it's a variety of things. But if you think that if your company employs 8 people, all 8 are probably not going to be there at once, you know, so as opposed to having a company with 200 people, 75% don't show up that day, you're in big trouble. A lot of these are smaller. I mean, we're talking about, you know, bakeries and car repair and painting and roofing and the things we all need. We all need in communities and creating those business opportunities. Other thoughts?
So, and we've had this discussion before, so someone that's just kind of starting to learn about this stuff, so I hear social enterprise, but then I also think of like peer-to-peer platforms. I think of like, Uber, because that's kind of social, because I can contact them on my app and I'm connecting to a real person, and they're serving, they're delivering a service that's needed in an area like transportation.
Mhm.
So how do you pull all these, like all of this is new?
Yeah.
All of it. So how do you pull these different pieces out and kind of keep it straight?
Keep it straight. I mean, I think the key to social enterprise or social businesses, social entrepreneurship, is that there is a social mission. That company, that organization exists to fill a need in the community and doesn't do it for profit. So if Uber's a great example of peer-to-peer and social entrepreneur, people being entrepreneurial, not social entrepreneurs. They're entrepreneurial. I'm going to be an Uber driver. I'm going to pick up 3 shifts on Uber, and I've got my clients, and I plug into the platform, and I'm an employee or contractor of Uber. But Uber's mission is not to provide transportation at the lowest cost to the marginalized in the most rural areas. So there's still a profit motive there that goes above and beyond who we're employing. Same thing with Lyft. But you have things like TaskRabbit. I mean, there are lots of different peer-to-peer kind of employment opportunities where folks are saying, oh, I could do that. Etsy also, great. You've got lots of those platforms where people are starting their own businesses, but the difference is, what are they doing? How does that business connect to a social mission? Do all the profits from the necklaces that I make go to pay the tuition for, children whose parents were incarcerated? So how does that exchange happen where the mission of the organization is there to meet a social problem need? I think that's the biggest distinction. So Uber is a great service. I love it. But where is the social problem that it's fixing? It's fixing a problem, but it's still very focused on revenue problem.
And it's connecting to a person. So there's distinctions there that you got to really, kind of deliberately think through, because we're so used to thinking going through an app is connecting to another person. That's a social interaction.
Well, so social being a different kind of social.
Right.
So social impact versus network and being part of social media in a sense, like having an app, having a social media platform, those kinds of things, being able to rate someone, the Yelps and all of that. So different. Entrepreneurs, absolutely. But is the person who's a Lyft driver driving and then taking all of their profits and supporting children in Zimbabwe? No. If they were, they could do something differently, reframe the way that they're working. But it's about doing something to fit a social problem, to meet those needs. Yes, Jack.
So I was just looking at Brick Street, entrepreneur with the business and economics college. I just was wondering, are there any sort of like technical help centers coming up in West Virginia, or places that for the resources? Like, for example, when I ran Scottsdale Settlement House, we had a thrift store, right?
Yeah.
So we had something that made money, and of course we had to get advice from tax accountants about how you file that differently
Right.
than you do, we have to pay sales tax on it and that sort of stuff. So we had to kind of figure all that stuff out. I'm just wondering if there's, of anything in West Virginia where there's sort of like lawyers or tax people or financial people or Secretary of State kind of helping to shape things.
I don't, not yet.
Yeah.
I think that when I have been having conversations around how do we encourage more social entrepreneurship and social enterprise development, I get connected a lot and referred back to, have you talked to the Coalfield development folks? So I think that in the state, they're probably one of the strongest examples, but I think that it's only a matter of time. We have small communities that have local needs and lots of populations that need employment. Again, 50% our workforce population in West Virginia. So how do we start thinking about this kind of model and the social problems that we have in relation to that 50% workforce participation rate and saying, okay, well, where's the low-hanging fruit? Are there folks that are not working that would like to work, but maybe they need at-home solutions? Maybe they need different approaches to work. Maybe they need transportation to work. Like, so a variety of different aspects. One of the first social enterprises that I ever visited was in Hungary. And this gentleman, it was called the Smart Company. And his wife had a disability, physical disability. And when she went to try and find employment, they told her that no one would hire her. And you know, I mean, this was probably about 20 years ago or more. And so the gentleman said, you know what? I'm going to start a company where you will absolutely have a job, and where people like you have a job. And so the Smart Company employed individuals with disabilities on a continuum. So severe physical disabilities, severe intellectual disabilities, really kind of ran the gamut. But there are different things that each person or each individual could do to create a product. There was one way where they made pillows and rugs, and so there was weaving and looming and sewing. There were individuals that had severe intellectual and developmental disabilities that put the handles on gift bags. You know, so you've got a variety of things that are needed in the community, and this man said, well, if no one's going to hire you, then I'm going to start a business that will hire you and other people like you that have been turned down because the business owners are not creative enough or thoughtful enough to do the work to figure out how can we take your drive, your commitment, your energy, and put that into a good workforce. So, I mean, there are pockets of this that have been happening for a long time. We just haven't been calling them what they are and really kind of creating a whole other sector around it, but they need support. Other questions or thoughts? Thank you. Lots of resources for reference if you're interested in those. And that's all I got.